Welcome to the show, everyone. Today is going to be a really fun episode. We've spoken a lot to master distillers, brand ambassadors, and people that are they're hitting feet on the ground, running around and doing all these things. But I've always wondered and wanted to speak to someone who's then taking the culmination of that information and shared it with the masses. So today I am very honored to have author of The Whiskey Bible, Noah Rothbaum, on the show. Before we get into it, big shout out to Laura for putting this together and connecting me with Noah. So Noah, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Of course, man. I'm excited to have you on. I'm glad that we were able to work it out. I know that I was recently on vacation, wanted to hurry back. First thing I want to do is make sure I got you on the show. My fiance is like, is that really what you're doing? You're going to keep skimming a book? I was like, we're the mountains. What else am I supposed to do?
I'm very proud of my new book, The Whiskey Bible, A Complete Guide to the World's Greatest Spirit, but I do have to admit it's maybe not the best book for vacation since it's so large. It's, more than 600 pages. So, they would take up quite a bit of your carry-on bag.
It can be used as a self-defense device if we see a black bear.
Absolutely. Whatever, it's many things. Doorstop, nutcracker, self-defense device, and hopefully entertaining, reading as well. But it's not the easiest book to carry around, which is one small problem of writing such large books.
Very fair. Also, Noah is the spirits editor at Men's Journal, the co-host of the award-winning Fix Me a Drink podcast, alongside the legendary David Wondrich, and the author of this new book, of course. So, he's also an honorary Kentucky colonel.
Yes.
So there is a lot of information and a great pathway in your life that's led you here. So, Noah, tell us about who you are, what you've done, and haven't covered.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's at this point a little bit of a bloated bio, but you're absolutely correct. I am the spirits editor of Men's Journal, the editor at large of Bartender Magazine, Fix Me Drink, and Life Behind Bars, a show that I hosted with Dave Wondrich. We've kind of taken a break, but you can find those episodes. I think there are more than 120 episodes together of that show, which was a wonderful experience. What else? I am a Kentucky colonel, which is an honorific title bestowed upon people who have made contributions to the great state of Kentucky by the governor, which I very proud of. Nobody ever calls me colonel. I kind of wish that they did, but even when I ask, they laugh. I'm James Beard Award winner. I've won multiple Tales of the Cocktail plates for when I was editing firstliquor.com, and then Half Full, the Daily Beast Drink and Food section. What else? I have a new book after The Whiskey Bible in October. The bartender Kenta Goto and I are rapidly finishing up a book called The Goto Bartender's Guide, which will be out in October. I'm a
You're not
fellow
messing around.
No, I know. It's a lot. I'm a fellow of the James V. Beam Institute at the University of Kentucky, which is part of their agricultural college.
Okay.
Which makes me very happy since now I have a team to root for during March Madness. Hopefully the Wildcats will prevail, and I will get to finally experience what it's like for a school that you're associated with to win a major sports title.
That's awesome. Man, you are a busy man, Noah.
I am. That is for sure. And it's kind of crazy that I get paid to drink cocktails and spirits and write about them for a living. I feel very, very fortunate.
You are living the dream.
Absolutely.
That would be awesome to one day. I can't imagine wanting to do something else, spending a lot of time with some very talented, unique people, getting to share all these experiences, make these memories, and try a different cocktail or drink or dram all the time as research purposes.
Absolutely. And that's part of the reason why I wrote The Whiskey Bible is that, obviously, I enjoy the act of drinking cocktails and spirits very much, in particular whiskey, but I find that experience is enhanced when I know the stories behind the dram, right? I know, the history or some of the history or know about the people who make it and the place where it's made, because every whiskey truly is a reflection of the people who've made it and also where it comes from, and it's almost like a liquid time capsule of a fixed moment in time. So all of that, I think when you know that, it only makes the experience of actually drinking what's in your glass more pleasurable.
I would 100% agree. One of the things that have always attracted me to a specific brand and or bottle has been the history behind it, or what the culmination
Yeah.
of its parts, like as you said. So hearing about the master distiller's journey, or even just the distillery's journey,
Yeah.
whether it sounds like a telenovela or not, it's always something. Because
But it,
you'll see some of those, especially back then, the kernels and rivalries of distilleries, and
absolutely. I mean, it's cutthroat,
yeah,
and that's, and,
and so
in
many back in the
some,
day were military too.
well, yeah, I mean, like over the centuries, the histories have become sanitized and romanticized, and
Mhm.
especially if you dig deep into the whiskey bible, like the each chapter for the major distilling areas, like the first half is sort of history, culture, information that you need to know, basics, and the second half are what I call family trees, where for each of the major companies, like, it shows like all of the different single malts or all the bourbons, or that, Diageo or Pernod Ricard owns, and sometimes the history of those companies. But I always thought, like, somebody will get a bottle of whiskey, they're been given it, or they see it on a menu or in a story, and then they go to the whiskey Bible and read that history. And some of those histories really are fascinating, very colorful, as you alluded to. The rivalries were no joke.
Yeah.
They would very intense. On Isla, which is an island off the west coast of Scotland, which is obviously famous now for its very smoky, peaty whiskeys. There was an event where, one brand was buying the other brand's, production or handling the sales of it. And then when they stopped, they literally created a distillery, like a copycat distillery, to take out their rival, right? Which is crazy. All these crazy stories have totally left out. Which are, and many cases, the truth is actually way more interesting
Yeah.
than the stories that we've been told, on advertisements in newspapers or on TV, or, and a lot of that was created by, the Don Drapers of the world sitting in conference rooms on Madison Avenue, dreaming up ad copy. But
Yeah. To your point, when you, if I know that we kind of, I guess, commercialize some of those stories to make sure that
yeah,
everyone feels comfortable with it, everyone enjoys it and glamorize it. It's like
right.
those fish tales. It's like, oh, all this, but and as you said it perfectly, one of my favorite examples is the Old Fitzgerald, why it got named what it was,
Yeah.
where the myth was he's a master distiller, one of the finest whiskeys in Kentucky, where the reality was he was a U.S. Treasury agent charged with ensuring during Bottle and Bond Act. As wait,
What?
are you about to tell me that's another myth removed?
I
Oh, I would
mean,
like to hear. All right,
how much do you? I mean, that's the problem,
I
right?
got time, right?
Right. I mean,
Where he used to
um,
steal from the barrels. That's what we were told.
well, I mean, that is one version of
I'm,
history, right? And
oh, now I'm
you
interested.
know, and it's that I don't actually believe to be true.
Okay.
So yes, I mean, you're right. Like, so Old Fitzgerald, very, very famous bourbon brand in America. Pappy Van Winkle, it's a Weller, the distillery that he owned with his partners that opened
Mhm.
after Prohibition. Their signature brand was Old Fitzgerald, right? So everybody thinks we all know about Pappy Van Winkle. Today, the man, Julian Van Winkle, who they called Pappy, or his workers actually called Mr. Van. Nobody called him Pappy at the distillery. Julian Van Winkle, like, we think that he made what we now know as Pappy Van Winkle. He had nothing to do with that, right? That's his descendants, right? He made his big whiskey was Old Fitzgerald. That was his signature whiskey. That was made at Sitza Weller, which is, in Louisville and Shively, right? He bought that brand with his partners during Prohibition, possibly, right?
Mm.
And it dates back, the name itself was trademarked in 1870. So, you know, I don't think the whole idea of the, old Fitzgerald being, a distillery agent named Fitzgerald, and he knew, you know, um, you know, where the good barrels was, it's probably not true. The original owner was a man named S.C. Herbst, who lived in Wisconsin. Um, Nobody really talks about it, but he's the one who sold Pappy Van Winkle and his partners the brand.
Okay.
I mean, back in 1870, that was when he trademarked the name. I don't even know if there were treasury agents before 1870, right? So that story comes from Sally Van Winkle's book. There's one line in her book about which then was taken by Larceny, Heaven Hills brand as sort of inspiration, which is a fabulous name for a bourbon, first of all.
Oh, larceny.
Like Larceny,
Yes.
yeah, what a great name, right? So the story itself was that kind of that inspired larceny, right? That idea that somebody, and I'm sure there were people stealing whiskey
Oh
from
yeah,
warehouses.
without a
So
doubt.
don't get me wrong. Like there was, Fred Noe, obviously Booker Noe's son, who is, I think, the seventh generation master of Siller Beam. He always used to joke. His dad would say, like, how do you know where the good barrels are in a warehouse? And like, I don't know. And Booker would say, they're shiny. Like, what do you mean they're shiny? And he would say, because the people who worked in the distillery, they knew where the best barrels were. And because they were always helping themselves to
Yeah.
samples, those barrels that wouldn't be dusty, right? All the other barrels would be dusty because nobody would ever tap them. But the best barrels were being tapped all the time because people knew that was the good stuff. And to be fair, up until fairly recently, those sort of unicorn barrels that were different and distinct, like I think I write in the Whiskey Bible, they were more of a problem than a blessing, right? Because there was no mechanism to sell single barrel whiskeys, right? So you'd either blend them out with everything else,
Mhm.
or, people at the distillery would drink them and enjoy them, right? Because liquor stores had no really means to sell them. Distributors didn't really want them. So like the whole system that we know and love today of all these limited editions and rare releases. It's like a fairly modern construct where back in the day, distilleries made one or two basic brands.
Mhm.
That's all they made, right? Like occasionally maybe they would add something else or a new age statement, but that, like, it wasn't, this kind of idea that somebody like Woodford Reserve has a whole line, or Jack Daniels, right? I mean,
Mhm.
again, or Maker's Mark. I mean, not even that long ago, like when I started writing about cocktails and spirits now, 26 years ago, give or take, they had like one product, right? Or maybe two products, and that was it, right? And we were grateful for those two products,
Yeah.
let alone holiday, barrel finishes and limited editions. So I'm bringing it around. Arthur's like, what does this have to do with Old Fitzgerald? But
Oh, not at all.
basically, the idea,
Th- This is part of the fun.
right? I mean, so I think that idea, I mean, it's a great story about that it starts with this treasure agent named Old Fitzgerald. I mean, my theory is that probably S.E. Herbst, who was Jewish, was probably like I.W. Bernheim, like at the time, not very, it would have been very hard for them to have their name on a label because of anti-Semitism, so that they chose like a very generic Gentile name. So, for Bernheim, that was I.W. Harper, right? I think Herbst probably chose Fitzgerald because there are tons of people named Fitzgerald in America, right? In the 19th century, even today, right? I
Yeah.
know several. And that was part of it, was that it sounded Scottish,
It's,
Irish,
it
old
was
world kind of whiskey.
it was
So
more
I think
palatable for the consumer at that time.
right at that time, like nobody, that, and also familiar, right? And kind of that kind of history. So, he chose this very generic name. I mean, I haven't found anything, like I haven't found an article that's like where he's like, this is why I called it Old Fitzgerald and not Old like Herbst. But like, I mean, that's the theory that I have. But what we definitely can say is like the whole idea that Fitzgerald was either a distiller or he was a treasure agent, I don't think actually is true. It's a great story, and some of the best whiskey drinking stories turn out not to be true, but I still
What?
enjoy telling them. I mean, like there's that old chestnut about the Manhattan cocktail being made, for a party that Winston Churchill's mom through Jenny Jerome. She was American. For Samuel Tilden, who had been elected governor of New York. Samuel Tilden was elected governor of New York. There's a statue not too far from my house of him
Mhm.
in Riverside Park. He was the governor. Jenny Jerome did live, in America. Unfortunately, though, I think Dave Wondrich, years ago checked into this, and it turned out to be um, one of these things where she was back in Europe giving birth. Dave and I, we he was editor in chief. I was associate editor of the Oxford Companion to Spirits and Cocktails, which came out in 2021, which is like a encyclopedia. We had contributors from all over the world contributing articles. It makes the Whiskey Bible seem like a small book. For that one, we
What?
definitely challenged the technology, binding technology for books. Like I think if we'd added any more, we might have had to go to 2 volumes.
You
But
got a phone call
fortunately,
from the publisher, like, "Hey man,
exactly,
relax."
somehow we were able to push it together to 1 volume. But you know, you know, which is where we some of those stories or some of the myth busting is in that book. But for things like the whole for the Manhattan, but again, I mean, I love that idea that Winston Churchill is one of the world's greatest imbibers, one of the world's greatest drinkers, right,
Yeah,
would be connected to the Manhattan cocktail. The idea was that maybe the party was being thrown at the Manhattan Club, which is still open
yeah.
in New York, and that's why the drink was created. She's back in the UK giving birth to Winston when that party happened, so that part doesn't actually check out.
Yeah,
But at the same time, we don't, for a lot of the stuff, we don't know. Like
yeah.
we know sometimes when we can fact check or myth bust by saying
Those
like
timelines don't
that,
make sense.
right, it
Yeah,
doesn't make sense, or somebody be like, oh, this person was the first distiller in whatever area, right?
yeah,
And we can say like, no, they're like
yeah.
their
There's patents.
references,
There's references or
right,
something.
they're reference to earlier distillers.
Yeah,
Who's the first distiller in that area? I have no idea,
yeah.
right? But like we could say that there were definitely earlier
Notable.
ones,
Yeah, or
right?
notable. Right.
Right.
Yeah,
And sometimes it's, sometimes we may never know, or sometimes somebody will find a book, in a library that nobody's ever seen before.
yeah.
And wow, and to be honest with the Whiskey Bible, like when I started working on it, my publisher, Workman, obviously they created the Wine Bible with Karen McNeil, which came out about
Mhm.
25 years ago at this point, which is an incredible book, very, very intimidating to follow in those footsteps, because that book is so um, well loved and essential for anybody who likes to drink wine. They have a beer Bible, and then they approached me in January of 2020 about doing Whiskey Bible to round out the series.
Mhm.
And I like immediately like agreed, and I thought, okay, cool. I'm gonna spend a lot of time on the road, like visiting all these areas, and then
Oh no,
obviously,
I get so
then obviously,
travel.
right, COVID hits a
Yeah.
couple months
Oh,
later.
2020. Yeah.
What the good news was that like a lot of libraries and institutions and archives like were rapidly digitizing their holdings, right?
Yeah.
And I was able to get access to libraries that I normally wouldn't, like Columbia's library or Harvard's or Princeton's. And, not only, could
Yeah.
I see what their collections had, but they were often willing to send me, parts of books, right? Like a
Yeah.
little synopsis. And sometimes that was really cool because like nobody would have, nobody ever heard of this book, but it wasn't that hard to track down, right?
Yeah.
Once I knew what to look for.
And I also think about how quickly you had access to that information versus if everything was different, right? You'd able to get not rapid access, but you won't have to travel all over the world.
But
Yeah.
like way, yeah. I mean, what, instead of going,
Hmm.
you know, trying to get access to, um, one of these academic libraries, which I don't know if I could have,
Yeah.
but even so, like, you're kind of constrained by,
Hmm.
figuring out what's there, and then, so this was a lot easier, and a lot of those, and, some of those fishing trips. I found really interesting stuff on like the manufacturer of oil, like distillation, but like had nothing, I was like, this is cool, but like not for me. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so then other times you'd be like, wow, like this is crazy. nobody's ever seen. Like I found a book that Hiram Walker, the big Canadian company, had published for their workers like in the 40s, and I was able to find a copy of that, which is not that expensive or hard to track down
Mhm.
because I don't think anybody was looking for it, right? Because none of us knew that to look for it. But the fact that it had all this information, right? Or I found an archive that had somebody who'd worked for Seagram's donated all types of stuff. And it was just like all this, I never thought that I'd be excited by reading congressional records or lawsuits or technical
Yeah,
journals
but
or,
I
you
think
know,
I don't know, man. The nerd in me or the very curious
oh,
person in
absolutely
me is
great.
absolutely thinking, yeah, I would love to hear about the lawsuits because what led us here? Because
Well,
especially taking legal
oh,
action versus
I
something.
mean, everything through the lens of Spears and Cocktails is way more fascinating, right?
Yeah,
So, like, everything that you're looking at is incredibly more interesting through that lens.
yeah,
And those types of documents are like an incredible gift for researchers and writers and people looking into the history of things because they are so detailed,
that
right?
part.
People are
Yeah,
giving testimony, like, they're giving their expertise, their expert knowledge, right?
yeah.
And that like, it's all there, right? It's all legitimate. So again,
I think that's part of
is
the
it
important part too, because it's no longer that tall tale, the game of telephone that we spoke
right?
about. These
Right. And
legal
you're
documents and fact checked, and this has
right.
been this actually happened. This was documented.
Right, where you're giving, and it's like the actual people involved, right? It's
Yeah,
not
not like a cousin's
hearsay or, right, it's
forefather's cousin.
not. I mean, every time I thought, okay, I'm just gonna like, let's see what the old Google says about X or Y, it's
Mm.
like pulling what's out there, right? I mean, the
Yeah,
same thing with AI, like it's pulling what's out there. So it's only as good as what's like on the interwebs for
and
it to pull out.
and to your point, a
So,
lot of those
like,
things weren't even digitized, so
right.
they
So
wouldn't have
you're
had access
not,
to it anyway.
right. I mean, where something like, for, there's a section, in my book about Glenlivet, right? And, the history of Glenlivet, which again, I thought I really knew, but I didn't, right?
Yeah,
But, in many ways it comes that George Smith and his son, after the sort of the laws, the regulations about getting a distilling license in Scotland changes, like in 1823, I think. They get their license in 1824, along with a whole bunch of other now famous household names.
mhm.
Um, you know, the the tax scheme, the getting the license becomes a lot cheaper. A lot of folks go, who had been making illegal whiskey now become legal. George Smith basically starts a distillery called Glenlivet, but like in fact, before he did that, essentially the whole area is Glenlivet. So all of the distilleries there called their whiskey Glenlivet, right? But he would then trademarks the term Glenlivet and prevents the other folks in the area from using it. It's kind of like the idea of Isla, right? Isla, on the west coast of Scotland, it's an island. We have Ardbeg, we have, Bowmore, we have Kalila. I think there are 8 or 9 distilleries now. They're all from Isla. The island is called Isla, Isla, but they all have their own brand names, right? And they're known for this kind of signature smoky, peaty, Bruichladdich. It's their, but it's kind of the same way where Glenlivet was like a region, like Highland, right?
Mhm.
But he trademarks the term Glenlivet as his brand name. And there is a lawsuit where the other distillers sue him and are like, or he sues them for using the term Glenlivet, essentially. So, like, there's a lawsuit where they're fighting over who can and who cannot use the term Glenlivet. And the compromise is that for them, the other distilleries, that they could use Glenlivet with their brand name. So, like, I remember seeing in Scotland years ago when I was working on my first book, The Business of Spirits, bottles that said Aberlour Glenlivet, right? Or Macallan Glenlivet. And I was just like, I don't understand, like, why would both names be on it? And the reason is because this lawsuit where they were arguing over who has the right to use it, that was the compromise, that they were able to use the term Glenlivet as long as they used their brand name.
Yeah.
So like again, I mean, it's like this lawsuit changes my whole view of like that area in Scotch history, right? And you'd never know because now the other brands that are near Glenlivet don't obviously use that term on their label. So it's, I mean, it's fascinating.
It is. There's so many details that are hidden in history, or we kind of lose after time and time. Like you could go to these tours and they see the glamorous storyline of how things were made and all that. Every once in a while, you do get those very interesting historical facts, but very often it's just a surface level for those, especially casuals, without having some deeper access to research or with a purpose. You went into it wanting to learn more, but for someone like me who isn't able or wasn't necessarily searching for that information, you can go in that dark little rabbit hole of like, I wonder who this person was, and do it on your own.
Right.
But most people aren't actively looking.
Right. And you would never know to look for it, or, a lot of stuff like has become romanticized, in retrospect, but like, Macallan uses the smallest stills in Scotland. Glenmorangie uses the tallest stills, right? And that's now part of their like selling point, right?
Yeah.
Obviously it's, a key contributor to the way that the whiskey tastes, right? It would taste and smell very differently if they used a different type of still or a different shape. But like looking back, that was not probably a decision, right? That was like, kind of like Anthony Bourdain, his advice: you're opening a restaurant, buy used pots and pans. Your pots and pans will be dented and scorched soon enough anyway, right? So just buy used equipment. So a lot of the distillers are buying used equipment. So, did Macallan, was that the stills that were available or that they could afford? Mm-hmm. Did their barn, was it had a particularly low roof? You know what I mean? Like Glenmorangie's, was where their space or what was available? I mean, again, like now it seems like a conscious decision, right? And part of their key messaging. But the time was very practical. Like what dictated the shape of your still was like who's selling a still and what you could afford, right? And what your space, allowed. Where now, if you or I were going to build a distillery, depending upon our budget, we would build the building and then we'd buy a still that fit that size of our needs, right? And people are like, Arthur, why did you buy that still? You're like, well, this is what I could afford. This is the size. This is how much. This is how many gallons we wanted to make every year. Like this is the type of spirit. We don't have those details, but I can tell you also, like, what was fascinating is, all of these stories, you look back and it's like, when before Glenfiddich opens, William Grant, the man and his family buy used stills. You know what I mean? Like he'd worked at Mortlock for years, which again, nobody talked about. And, another distillery was changing their stills. Like, boom, there you go. Like those are the original stills at Glenfiddich, like, but I mean, now this is all like carved in stone, right? Like Macallan will always have to use the small stills.
This is now part of their brand, part of their identity.
Will always have to use tall stills, right? The Glenmorangie's mascot is like a giraffe, right? There's always, which at first is like giraffe, like why a giraffe? And I was like, this makes perfect sense because you have the tallest stills in Scotland. Never forget that after that, right? But again, it's just one of these things where now it's so much of their identity, where 200 years ago, there's just, who did they think that they were going to be around in 2026 making whiskey? Like probably not. Like, that 200 years down the road would have been, quite a long time to project, but here we are.
Yeah. I do love that because I don't think that I've thought of the fact that the availability shaped their identity. And that makes so much sense. Essentially, especially when, to your point, we spoke about the rivalries and how fast everything was moving and everyone's trying to make a product. Some of those could have just been, I need to get something to market right now. Or, hey, or it could have been part of the rivalry. He has a small still, I want a large one. Because screw him, because I don't like him. Who knows why really led to this? I
mean, sometimes like we now look back with very romantic, glasses on.
Yeah.
But like even something like Irish whiskey, which now, really the hallmark of Irish whiskey is that it's made with malted and unmalted barley, right?
Yep.
Malted barley is just a fancy way, we're making booze, so we want sugar. Barley has starch. Barley, as I like to say, is the X-Men. He's sort of barley is like the Wolverine of the X-Men, right?
Yeah.
It's of all the grains, it has the enzymatic powers to turn its starches to sugars once it thinks it's going to start growing.
Mhm.
So, we wet the barley so it thinks it's about to sprout, so it changes the starches to sugar, and then we want to shut that off before it actually starts growing, so we bake it or roast it.
Yeah.
In Ireland, at a certain point, they were being taxed on how much malted barley they were using to make their whiskey. So they were like, you know what? We're going to do half malted barley, half unmalted barley. And they suddenly cut their tax bill in half, right? And that again,
That's so fascinating.
right, where today Irish whiskey would taste a lot different if they used 100% malted barley, right?
Mhm.
Um, and now it's, this point of pride, but it gave them a very practical decision
Mhm.
to cut their tax bill. The same thing with, they were being taxed by like essentially the fill level in the stills. So they designed their stills for efficiency, but also to lower their tax bill,
Mhm.
right? So again, some of these things we look back and we're like, they were very, very practical concerns, right? That, they weren't really thinking, I don't think like, oh, this, we'll be known for this in a couple of centuries. This will be the way that the marketing teams will, be able to define us in advertising versus other types of whiskey. So no, it was like, wow, like
It was what was
this
available.
this tax bill is crazy. Like we're not going to be able to survive if like we got to find a way to cut our taxes, and that's how they did it. So again, I mean, it's like sometimes very, very practical concerns several centuries later, have turned into very romantic talking points or marketing, copy.
Yeah. I love that. You got me now wanting to go down a dark rabbit hole of like information. You have so much knowledge, but what essentially brought you into this industry? Was it something, were you a bartender? What got you into the spirits
Yeah,
phenomenon
I
more?
mean, it's one of these funny things. It's like I've never worked as a professional bartender. I've only basically had, I mean, in my whole career as a writer or journalist, I knew from an early age this is what I wanted to do. You know, I did an internship in college at Food and Wine magazine at the time, working for a new associate editor named Pete Wells, who had just come over. Pete had been the original when Time Out New York launched in the early 90s. Pete had been, or mid 90s, Pete had been the original bar, cocktails and spirits expert. So he'd come over to Food and Wine. Letty Teague, who, one of the world's most respected wine experts, was there. Kate Crater, who now runs Bloomberg's Pursuits, the food coverage, was there. Tino Ulaki. So I mean, it was like incredible roster of drink and food experts.
Mm.
I didn't. I was, what did I know, right? I didn't know anything. I was 21. Um, and really that summer working with all of them, with Pete and Letty, like just totally opened my eyes to cocktails and spirits and obviously delicious food. But it was one of these things where it was like, okay, like people are writing about food, um, it was sort of the beginning of the obsession that we now have with chefs and cooking and baking. But cocktails and spirits were still like not particularly popular, right? They were kind of, the rebirth was happening, was just getting started. Um, and like meeting folks like Dale DeGroff, who's the father of the rebirth of the cocktail, and researching stories about Irish whiskey and other cocktails and spirits topics, like really opened my eyes. I was like, this is like fascinating. And nobody knows anything about it. If you went to a bookstore, there'd be like 3 books, like on drinks, right? Literally. Now there's, you know,
Significantly
bookshelves
more.
of, like so, there are almost too many books right at this point.
Mm.
We're there, like we had like 3 books. So I felt like, kind of right place, right time, right? It was just such an incredible opportunity to tell these really fascinating, rich stories. And when I started telling people about some of the stuff that I was working on, like they were interested, right? Which is what better topic for a journalist than one that fascinates people and they want to hear more.
Mm,
And also it's about booze, right? And I was like,
fair.
this is like crazy. Like I get to like free booze basically. I get to like
You
go to
just
all
looking
these
at
incredible
looking
places.
looking around. So you want
Like
me to get
right,
drink and write
right.
both things I
You're
love?
gonna you're gonna send me samples of your alcohol. I will get to visit like all these amazing places, meet all these
What's the catch? Looking around.
colorful, right, passionate people. I mean, the catch was at the time is that like there were relatively few publications that actually wanted to publish cocktails and spirit stories. So that was, I mean, that was hard,
Yeah.
and really until my first book, The Business of Spirits, came out in 2007, the fall of 2007, which was about different trends in the liquor industry. It was hard. I mean, you could write about booze, for the holidays, Mother's Day, Father's Day, Cinco de Mayo, the Kentucky Derby. But beyond that, like, it wasn't a lot. Like, people didn't really want that much. Editors didn't want to buy stories about cocktails. Now, obviously, we're sort of living in a golden age of both, cocktails and spirits, but also cocktails and spirits writing, I would argue. Um, so that really, that was hard the first few years, like, and definitely were, it was the type of thing that I was passionate in and about, but really could not, was not like a career, right? Like,
Interesting.
you know, I couldn't just write about it. So I wrote a lot about, I worked at Smart Money, the Wall Street Journal's magazine, not about how to make money, but how to spend it. For about 3 years as their travel writer expert. I try to write about cocktails and spirits whenever I could. And then I left to write my first book. And then, at that point, things started to pick up and more places wanted stories on a more regular basis about drinks. Ultimately, I became the founding editor of the site liquor.com in 2009, which was the
Yeah.
first employee, and it was just a URL, and I ran that for about
On liquor.com, right?
yeah, about 4 years, and then I left. I finished up my second book, The Art of American Whiskey, which is a book about a visual history of American whiskey told through label art and bottle design. I'd gone down to Kentucky to see Bill Samuels from Maker's Mark. He was about to introduce Maker's 46, and we made a few stops on our way down to Laredo in his Astro van. He had no air conditioning. He picked me up at the airport, and
Mm.
we were driving down.
In
And
Kentucky with no
in
AC?
Kentucky, oh, it was amazing. Um, we stopped at the Bourbon Heritage Center at Heaven Hills,
Yeah.
or it was then Bourbon Heritage Center. And I remember walking around, and he was like, "Oh, you haven't been? You got to check it out," which I appreciate. And I started walking around. I saw all these old labels and bottle art and designs. I thought, oh, that would be such a cool book.
I
And
have
then I
seen
was
that
like,
at Heaven Hills. Like,
and then I was like, oh, wait, I should do that book. So, by the time I got home, I already started working on a proposal for that. And then for about 6 years, then I ran the Daily Beast, brought me on as a drinks columnist, and then ultimately, soon after to create a whole drink and food section, which was called Half Full, which I ran for about 6 years. And there was where Dave Wondrich was able to poach Dave from Esquire. He was their lead cocktail writer for, I don't know, 16, 17 years. So Dave came over, and we folks like Wayne Curtis and Lou Bryson and Dave Brew. So it's kind of a powerhouse roster of drinks and food writers. People like Mimi Sheridan, the legend, was writing for us. So yeah, I mean that was pretty amazing. And now over at Ben's Journal and Bartender Magazine. So yeah, it's been
it's a
I
old
thought I was
ride.
busy 20 years ago.
You thought you were
No,
busy 20 years.
I thought I was busy 20 years ago. Now it's like obviously
Isn't
Um,
that funny how that works? Like you could,
yes, yes.
you're like, nah. I can make time for that. Well, I can make time for that.
Oh,
Well, I
for
can make
sure. I
time for that.
mean, absolutely.
And
I
yeah, you're
mean,
spending
especially
every waking
opportunities.
moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's really this funny thing is I feel like, I spend most of my time like thinking, really thinking or writing about cocktails and spirits and often about whiskey, which is a fabulous place to live.
Oh, it is.
And just and get to meet really cool people, like,
Mhm.
who are really people who work in this industry or care about it are usually so willing to share their knowledge, and they're so happy that people are interested, and they're really invested in educating people, both in the industry but also drinkers in what they make and overall. So, I mean, I can't really think of another industry that where like people are so willing to share their information, right? And it's some of it like there are no trade secrets per
Right.
se, right? I mean, maybe nobody knows the exact recipe of chartreuse except for a few monks in France,
Yeah.
but it's for the most part, everybody are friends. Like, there obviously are a few bitter rivalries, or I can think of a few,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but for the most part, most of the brands, like,
They
there
get
are no
along.
secrets, right? If somebody needs help, you just pick up the phone and call somebody or shoot them an email, and they're like more than willing to help. Even if they are rivals on the store, the people who make it are friends, right? They'll have lunch
Yeah.
together, they'll ask each other for advice or
Hmm.
taste stuff, or they're best friends, or they're so not, a
They
lot of
do a
them
bottle
are
share or something
related.
like that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, which is
It's more like friendly competition. Most of the
yeah,
times when I do interact with anyone in the industry, they have nothing but nice things to say about the others.
yeah,
Every once in a while,
yeah.
there's people who just aren't.
Sure. I mean, but
Like,
that's always like to me, that's always.
that's part of life. There's always going to be someone you
But
meet that
I'm
that's.
always like a little bit, if somebody starts talking trash to me about somebody else and I don't really know that person,
I wonder about them.
I'm always right. You're always like,
Why are you?
you okay? Like,
Yeah,
who are you? Like, what? Like, how do you know that I'm not best friends with that person? You know what I mean? Like,
that's a
or
fair.
I don't love their product,
That's a fair
like,
sentiment.
right. And then sometimes I've seen like somebody do that and then they have to work at that brand that they didn't think very
Oh my
highly.
god, I've heard. So I have a lot of friends in the bartender industry, and
Right. Sure.
we've
Of
had a
course.
offshoot bartender that I knew. He was kind of like talking smack about a specific bar and saying that
Sure.
their drinks aren't really unique. He was just talking smack about
Right.
their menu
Of course.
and that they're not creative. I'm like, okay, like I
Right.
love the place. I don't know, whatever.
Right.
And then 6 months later, I see them working there, and there was a
Right.
point of me is like, okay,
Karma.
yeah, I was
Karma.
like,
It's
all right. Like, I'm not here to judge. Life happens.
I mean, it is what it is, and sometimes you have to learn that lesson the hard way, right?
100%.
But yeah, and I mean, it's one of these things where every time I think I've learned everything about bourbon, scotch, rye, whatever it is,
Mhm.
there's like a whole world, like a whole like it feels like we're like archaeologists, and there's like a city below this city. It's like you
Yeah.
just keep digging down. It's like, oh my god, and then it's like, I mean, it's the best feeling and the worst feeling when you're like, you find something, you're like, oh my God, why didn't I ask that question? Like,
Mm.
why this was hanging out there? Like, why, and you'll talk to certain people like Dale DeGroff or my buddy Todd Leopold down in Denver, or Nicole Austin and George Dicko, and, just be talking about stuff. And then suddenly you're like, or
I would love
Stephanie
to talk to
McLeod
those
at
people.
Doers, right? And then you're like, the light bulb goes off and you're like,
Mm.
huh, like, why didn't we, what? Why did I ever ask you about that? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't.
Yeah.
Why didn't you? Like, I don't know. And you're like, and it always gives you a different level of appreciation and detail and knowledge. And I mean, obviously, a lot of that went into the Whiskey Bible,
Yeah.
which was at the beginning was, oh my God, like, am I going to have enough? Right? That's every writer's fear, right? And
Yeah.
then the pendulum swings,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh my God, it's too much.
And
Like,
now I have
it's
a weapon on my shelf.
right.
Yeah.
It's feast or famine where you're like, oh my God, like, and the publisher's like, enough, dummy. Like, Like
Does your
this is
publisher call you
enough.
and say, "Hey, relax"?
No,
Oh, I was
well,
about to say, I was like, I
no,
feel
that's
like,
not usually how it works.
yeah,
But like, I mean, for this project, there were, I worked with several editors. Um,
I was going to ask you
like,
when
you
you
have
made the
to. I mean, it's.
when you made the whiskey Bible. How does it set itself apart from other books and writings? Like, where is that a conscious effort to try to go a specific way with that?
I mean, it's a. You want me to pause while this
Nope.
fire truck? All right, you don't
Oh,
hear it. All
oh,
right,
is that your house? I thought it was mine.
that's my house. No, that's New York City, man.
What part of New York
That's
City are you in?
I'm in Manhattan on the Upper West Side.
Oh yeah,
So,
I'm born and raised in Manhattan.
oh,
I'm currently in Orlando, but I was born and raised in
okay.
Manhattan. So I lived in Washington Heights for
Oh, sure. Yeah, of
26 years of my life, and then I moved to
Yeah,
Massachusetts for like 15 minutes. Like it was like for 3 years, and then I
yeah.
moved to Florida to help family.
I am not far down the Hudson from Washington
That
Heights.
is
So,
interesting because I was
yeah,
planning on visiting Manhattan the upcoming months. I,
that's funny.
yeah, we wanted to do. We have a good friend of the show, Permanent Vacation. They do a bar takeover or partnership with Paradise Lost.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Tiki themed bars.
Yeah,
So
sure.
they had they had invited me. Hey, if you would like, you can come take photos, do the event with us, and blah blah, kind of work with us.
Yeah,
So planning on following with them if they do that this upcoming year. So
yeah, that would be amazing. Well,
yeah.
if you come, let me know.
Oh, 100%.
What
But
was I saying?
the Whiskey Bible, what set itself apart from similar books
yeah.
and writings?
I mean, that was hard. I mean, well, first of all, like the Wine Bible is like such a like incredible book, like that, was very intimidating to think, okay, like what can I do that would be worthy of being like a sister book, right?
Yeah.
And then again, I mean, at first I thought, okay, I'm gonna take everything that's in my mind and put it on paper, right? Which is like a big task as it is. But then you're like, oh, let me just find that document. Let me just find that book. Like, let me double check X or Y. And you're like, oh my God, like nobody's ever double checked any of this. Like, we've not actually, we reference all this stuff, but we've not actually looked, right? And then once I realized that, I think, that changed everything, right? Where I went down all these incredible rabbit holes. And the information, I would argue, in the Whiskey Bible is very unique, right? It's not the normal chestnuts that we've been telling for, I don't know, 50, 75 years, 25 years at least, that like this is like goes above and beyond the like puffery and the advertising copy and all of the marketing speak, which essentially had become accepted as historical fact, right? And we just sort of accepted that this would is true, right? Like, what if a brand said it was started in that year, it was started in that year. Or in fact, you go back and you're like, I don't know what that number is on your bottle, but it doesn't really, and like Dave Wondrich has this theory that like a lot of this is like, at a certain point, like marketing comes in like in the late 1800s, like the first PR agencies in the US come in after the Civil War, and marketing, becomes like a thing, in the late 1800s, national brands. But you and I, we've been making Arthur's Select for 50 years. And I'm like, hey, Arthur, like I'm designing our box and our label. When did we start this company? And we're like, I don't know. Like,
I'll write that down.
we're like, my grandfather actually started it. And I don't know, like, let's say 1847, right? And you're like, great, we started the brand in 1847. And it's like, then you have somebody like myself come along. You're like, there are tax records from like 1835 for your brand. Like what, like when was it started? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, and a lot of times we're like, I don't know, like why, like we don't know like what old number seven means on a Jack Daniels bottle, for instance. I found the patent for it, right? The
Yeah.
trademark, I should say, not patent, but the trademark for it that was filed by Jack Daniels' nephew, Len Motlove. Does it say what it refers to? No.
Just
So
number
again,
seven.
I mean, old number seven, like they knew that it was part of the brand identity. It was important
Mhm.
enough to trademark it. What it referred to, we don't know exactly. And does it matter? Possibly not. But then, like, you know, in the book, like, looking, for instance, like Jack Daniels, looking at old advertising, they're talking about like through the turn of the century, they used a chamber still, like a wooden chamber still, a chamber still ultimately, right? Which
Okay.
is you're looking at me like, what is he talking about?
Yeah, I'm
This
about to
is
Google it. I have
like
no
a
idea.
missing step between the pot still, the copper onion shaped still, like that's used in Scotland and Ireland and around the world, and then the high efficient column still that we use in America to make whiskey, right? So there was like an intermediary step. There are actually many
Oh,
intermediary steps, but
I
the
think I've
one
seen
that
this. Yeah.
right, it was literally at first was like made out of a log, like a hollowed out log, and then ultimately a wooden chamber still, which then becomes the three chamber still, which Todd Leopold and Leopold Brothers in Denver
That's
has
exactly who came up right
resuscitated.
away.
Right. I mean, it's the only three chamber still in operation in the world. But basically in America, like distilling was part of like a bigger economy, right? It was farmers,
Mhm.
so the grains would be used to for food, but also obviously leftovers returned to the booze, which was more shelf stable, would increase their value. The leftovers from making whiskey was then fed to cattle to raise cattle. Turns out to make cattle feed, it's better if you basically cook the feed in the still. Like you put everything in. In Scotland and Ireland, they just put the liquid into the still of the beer, the so-called beer. In America, we put everything, the grains, the spent, the grains into the still. The spent grains are then fed to cattle. Cattle like the grains when they're less rich. They don't have the stomach enzymes to digest rich food, so they like spent grains that are, that have less nutrients. So it's better for cattle. And to be honest, like in America and Canada, like the feedlot is really more important than making whiskey. The problem with this is that if you're using a copper pot still, you're burning the solid, the feed in the still. It's very hard to distill without burning it. It tasted like, I imagine, like microwave popcorn that's gone a few seconds too long, and you have those burnt clusters that then infuse the whole bag with smoke. Um, so we switched to this chamber still, which uses the newfangled technology of steam, which allows you to keep the grain in there, cook it, but make whiskey that's not burnt. Jack Daniels, like through the 1800s, is still using chamber still, according to their ads. We never really, this idea of like the Lincoln County process where, Tennessee whiskey, in particular Jack Daniel's Dickel, is filtered through burnt charcoal before it's barrel aged, right? Which is one of the signatures of Tennessee whiskey.
Yeah. The
Why do we
char.
do it? Right. It's charcoal filtration, which has been
Mhm.
around for hundreds of years, right?
Mhm.
For water, for booze, for other things. It goes through charcoal, then it goes through like a wool blanket to, pick up any of the charcoal so it doesn't go into the whiskey or into the spirit to become whiskey. But it's like one of these things like we all know about the Lincoln County process, but why do we do it? Right. And that Whoa. I
Bless you.
feel that coming. That's for the blooper reel.
Bless you.
Um,
Part of the
thank you.
unfiltered for sure.
Um, but we didn't nobody really knew why we would have the Lincoln County process,
Yeah.
right? So like for the whiskey Bible, one of the things like looking at like that type of thing, like finding those ads, the process, we always think of it as like an additive process, but it's really removing stuff.
Mhm.
And I would argue, that it's the type of thing was that because they were using the chamber still for so long, that they were getting flavor compounds that they didn't want, and that the Lincoln
Ah.
Crowley process was important to remove them. Like now, Jack Daniels, if you go there, uses these giant column stills that are size of elevator shafts, right? They don't need to use the Lincoln County process. Obviously, if they stopped doing that today, the whiskey would taste very different. But back in the day, they actually needed to do it because they were removing flavor compounds that they ultimately didn't want in the whiskey. So again, I mean, like the devil's in the details. So all these stories and small things, with the whiskey Bible, I was trying to go beyond just saying like, yes, like to make Tennessee whiskey, you have to use, according to state laws, regulations, you have to use the Lincoln County process. But actually also answering the question of like, why?
Mhm.
Like, where did this come from and why do we do it? Right. Which again is those types of that type of information is very hard. Like, why did Irish whiskey disappear, in the 20th century and Scotch didn't? Like all these major questions that were very hard to find an answer to. I've tried to answer in the whiskey Bible, so that when people are like, whatever happened to Campbelltown, like,
Mhm.
well, they can look like, why do we do this? Well, like, here you go, because like otherwise, like it comes out of my own like curiosity
Yeah.
about the world of whiskey and why we do things, and I could never find an answer. The answers I found were like not particularly satisfactory.
So you dug more and dug more.
Exactly.
And it was
And here we are.
with a
Yeah.
600-page book. So,
Right. Exactly.
which I'm still going through. Not gonna lie, Tennessee was a vacation, so still gonna keep
Sure.
going through it. For those who are less advanced or those novices and just beginners, I think that they're, at least on the surface so far, what I have gone through, there's a very, very detailed way of how you convey and tell the story
Yeah.
and make it simplified, and then still beneficial to those advanced and intermediate and all those to get more information out of it because you're giving them that history.
Well,
Uh,
thank you.
yeah, of course. But as part of that, there's also a utility portion of it, right? So when we're talking about
Yeah.
if for those that are first into learning how to get into the world of whiskey, which is part of our show, is to kind of create this space for those who don't know to still feel comfortable and to learn more into this. And if they're making their first kind of exploratory journey into the spirit industry or to spirits in general, making a cocktail or just learning about spirits, having those resources for someone
Sure.
who is learning. Would you say that the book could also be a great reference tool for them as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I was trying to make it for
Mm-hmm.
people of all levels, right? Like folks who are just getting into whiskey, people who've been in whiskey, people who work in whiskey. Like hopefully there's
Benefits
knowledge
of it.
at every level, and that it like the book, as your interest grows, like the book will grow with you, right? So that
Mm-hmm.
you'll find more and more, that interests you as you get into the topic. And there's like a whole appendix with like a whiskey timeline from the beginning to the modern day.
I did see that.
There's an appendix with 60 cocktail
I
recipes,
saw that as
whiskey
well.
cocktail recipes, like 30 classic whiskey cocktail recipes, 30 modern classic whiskey cocktail recipes from top bartenders around the world. So again, I mean, I think,
Yeah.
this whiskey, again, like people should feel that it's for all people, right? Whiskey doesn't belong to anybody, right? It's for all adults. That
Mm-hmm.
should be enjoyed by everybody, in my opinion, and in the way that you enjoy it, right? Don't let anybody tell you how you're supposed to drink whiskey. A lot of these rules are 100% made up. If you want to add ice or water or club soda or a mixer, you definitely should.
It's your whiskey. Drink it how you want.
Right, exactly. Like so, like people should feel empowered to drink whiskey. I think traditionally whiskey has been marketed like in a way that's very intimidating, right? And
Yeah.
this feeling that only, old white dudes can drink whiskey is like absolute ridiculous horseshit. Like it's like whiskey belongs to
I
everybody.
I agree.
And it's as a type of thing that like, you know, we should like it shouldn't be gatekept. And like the whole point of the whiskey Bible was like, I'm gonna put all the information in this book so that everybody should feel confident and empowered to drink whiskey, right?
Yeah.
So it's this belongs to all of us, right? And that's this is a global spirit. It's one of the few things that really you that kind of brings the world together, or much of the world together, right? And it's made all over the world at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So like this should be something that unifies us, not
Divides us.
divides us. Yeah.
Which I love that you highlighted that point. On earlier episodes of our show, we discussed that even creating a show
Right.
that's about spirits, there's a whether people knew it or not, there was this kind of misconception that, especially I'm Hispanic, that we just stick to agave spirits and rum. I was like, no, not necessarily. I was like, that's gotta, we're not gonna touch that. Like,
Right.
but it was, as I said, yeah, I'm a really big bourbon person. I was like, and you would get looks even from people who are the same race as myself. And it was like, really? Like, to your point, there was that misconception where it was kind of gatekeeped and there was a specific type of person who drank the spirit. But when you discuss it in the Whiskey Bible and the more research people do, they understand that there are other countries all over the world that are also making whiskey or inspired by whiskey. Hell.
And also the people who've made whiskey
come from all over the world.
Yeah, and a way more diverse history than we ever thought, right? And way more portrayed with a lot of like immigrant groups coming, at least in America, right? Immigrant groups coming to America, bringing with them specific agriculture or distilling knowledge that allows us to create our American whiskey industry, which 100%. Never would have happened without these immigrant groups, right? And all this knowledge from all over the world. So again, I mean, it has a way more diverse history and background than anybody would ever believe.
That's what I loved about what I saw in your book. You talked about the other countries and their styles.
Absolutely.
Everything they've been doing in that history of how long ago it was. So no one would feel like, oh, they're copying. No, this is something either is going on simultaneously with people not knowing that the other parts of the world were doing this or inspiring each other.
And I think that's one of the most interesting trends today is that you have countries, regions, areas that are making whiskey for the first time, which is wonderful because they're putting their own local spin, whether it's, their own local, grains, ingredients, distilling style, technology, types of wood for the barrels, right? And that's fascinating. That's what's the next chapter of whiskey. And in the future, if there are future editions of the Whiskey Bible, knock on wood, some of those countries might need their own chapters, right? And maybe there are countries that we don't even know about that will need their own chapters down 100%. The road. And that's the wonderful thing. I don't, everybody gets to do it in their own style and create, their own kind of whiskey, which then they share with the world and we get to drink it. So, I mean, what could be bad about this?
Not a single thing. Not a damn thing. I was going to say one of my favorite brands of rums. They take a lot of practices from American whiskey. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the brand Brugal. So they take. I know that their master rum distiller. She said that her love for the American bourbons, whiskeys, all that kind of inspired her visionary collection. Some of 1888, some of her lines to follow the finishing in bourbon barrels or some of that end part of that process. So definitely I think that there's a lot of possibility that other countries, nations, and just people in general might come up with very unique runs of it. But the Bible does give a lot of that for the whiskey geek, that distinction, sorry, been a long week, and gives that approach to defining those differences, but also aligning with why they share a lot of those commonalities. So for those who are interested, so far, like I said, not going to lie, I haven't read the whole thing, was on vacation, but definitely something.
I think it's not the type of book that I assume people will read and sit down.
But I think you added a lot of value with the cocktail recipes, the quick history, and giving all these options. Yeah, of course. Because I think it's such a great, the way that you approach it, at least from what I've been able to see, gives it a lot of utility. Makes it make sense. It's like, all right, so I know all this knowledge. How am I going to apply it? Well, all right, so I know the different areas and regions. What's that timeline? You're giving a lot of different avenues for people to enjoy the book. Definitely. So with your knowledge, I want to ask you kind of a couple of questions of how you could help people who are in that intermediate trap or people who have not as experienced. It's some more advanced and others more in the space of casual, which would still fall from that, still falling from that marketing fluff. What's a fact or something, a piece of advice that you would give to those who are learning?
Well, I mean, I think the good news and the bad news is that just because a whiskey is older or more expensive doesn't make it better, right? I mean, if it was only that simple, right, then I wouldn't need to write the Whiskey Bible.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of folks assume that, okay, this whiskey is $50 and this other one's $100. I'm going to like it twice as much. And it's that's usually not that straightforward, right? It's what the prices reflect like actual costs, right? Like as you're aging whiskey, what we call the angel share, fancy way of saying evaporation, right? So,
Devil's foot.
you're right, you're not gonna get the full amount out at the end, right? You're gonna lose the barrel. It's full when you put it in the warehouse. When you take it out, depending on how old it is, you may have half of the barrel left, or you might have a third, right? So obviously, the fewer bottles you get out, the more expensive they have to be to cover the cost, right?
Mhm.
And then also you're paying for warehousing, you're paying for, all the carrying costs, taxation,
Paper,
production costs, all this
glass.
stuff, right? I mean, all the different people who are involved, the distributors, the retailers, right? So by the end of the day, I mean, there are very like practical costs associated with older whiskey. Some older whiskeys are incredibly delicious and you may love them. Some older whiskeys taste like liquid wood, and it's very subjective,
Yeah.
right? Some people like that. Like some
Mhm.
people really like tannic whiskey.
Mhm.
And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's very hard to predict. It's both an art and a science. So, you can have two or three barrels sitting next to each other. Same whiskey made the same day, same type of barrel, same warehouse, and they taste completely different. Like that's what's magical, amazing, and also horribly frustrating about making
Yes.
whiskey
And
is
it's
that like it's very
frustrating consuming
unpredictable.
as well.
Right. So again, I mean, I think there's also this assumption that craft spirits are inherently better than spirits from big producers, right? Which is,
I think
I
that's a
think
fair assessment as
for
well.
I think buying eggs or buying butter or cheese, that might actually be true, right? You go to
Mhm.
the farmer's market,
Mhm.
organic small producers who are, producing, meat or eggs or any poultry or whatever, probably going to be better than supermarket brand stuff, right? Mass market stuff, right? Um, Spirits like not that easy, right? Because the everybody uses the same grain for the most part. Everybody
Yeah.
uses the same machinery, the same stills.
Yep.
Everybody uses the same barrels. If anything, the smaller producers are disadvantaged because they get their grain after the bigger ones have bought it. They don't have the barrel contracts. They're often forced to use barrels that aren't as good or grain that's not as good.
Yep.
And they don't have the
Or source
technical
their stuff.
know-how. Right, exactly. Or their source. So again, I mean, I think that,
And for those listening at home, we're not sure what we mean by sourcing. Is like especially a younger
yeah,
distillery doesn't have because making whiskey takes time, and if you're
right,
new into the game or in the industry, you don't have time on your side, so you will buy from established
right. You'll finish
distributions.
whiskey. Right, exactly.
Mhm.
Um, so I mean, in some ways, the big established brands, I mean, offer usually more reasonable prices,
Consistent
and
product.
consistency is really the gold standard, right? Like it's not about making one barrel that tastes good. It's about making your whiskey tens of thousands or millions of cases taste consistent and good year in and year out,
Mhm.
decade after decade, right? And that takes incredible skill and talent, blood, sweat, and tears. This
Practice.
isn't like other industries where, like I don't, big factories, like I don't know who runs a big factory that makes, a soda or like a
Mhm.
stack cake or whatever. Here, I mean, maybe the same, I don't know, but here in our industry, even the biggest brands, there are people, this is their life's work. They
Mhm.
give like everything they have to make this product as good as it can possibly be. So, I would not dismiss these brands immediately. Some of the smaller craft brands are wonderful, and their big advantage is innovation, right? And
Love it.
um
Yeah.
they can afford, if something doesn't work right, to move on. Where the big brands, it's like a much bigger bet.
Yeah.
They have to sell 40,000 cases the first year for an extinction. um so again, I mean, I think, not dismissing the big brands, not thinking that you have to break the bank or buy incredibly old whiskey to get something that you'll like.
Yeah.
Um, I would also, find a bar that has like a big selection. Part of the reason why I wrote about whiskey to begin with and like spirits was that the wine world seemed overwhelming to me, right? Where I was like, oh my God, like how would I ever memorize all of these varietals and countries and the rules
The
and the
grapes and
regulations, the grapes and
the specific ferment. I don't know.
so many,
So
right?
many
I mean,
rules.
even to be knowledgeable about Italian wine or French wine
Yeah.
alone without even knowing about Australia, New Zealand, America, Chile, Argentina, right? I
Oh
mean,
my
it's like
gosh. Yeah.
I have so much respect for people who can keep all that stuff straight. Like I could wrap my mind around spirits, right? At the time,
Hmm.
25 years ago, 26 years ago, there were like maybe five bourbons,
Yeah.
five single malts, right?
Yeah.
Like you could taste all of them in one afternoon at a bar, right? If you had
Had the
a
budget.
quiet bar, right? Quiet bar budget. It wasn't even that expensive. It was dirt cheap,
That
right? I
is
mean,
fair. The whiskey industry boomed over the
this
last
is
15
dirt
years.
cheap, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, at the same time, you can learn a lot. You go to a good bar, maybe not the fanciest bar, but a good bar, and
Hmm.
say like, okay, like, I want to learn about whiskey. Can I buy like a half pour? Can I
Hmm.
buy like a half an ounce?
Hmm. Okay. Wait, let me get half an ounce of these five and
Right?
explore.
Like, give me. You have, you know, the five bourbons. Like, can I buy half an ounce of each?
Hmm.
And they say, no, find a different bar. Right? Go to a different bar. Say, okay, thank you so much. You go somewhere you can't do that. Okay, that's okay, cool. Find a different bar that will, right?
Yeah.
And try five, or go to your friend's house, right? And say,
Do a bottle
everybody,
share. Yeah.
right? Just say, hey, you mind if I take a little bit? I just want to take, I've never tasted rye whiskey versus bourbon or Tennessee whiskey Jack Daniels versus I would love to compare it.
Yeah.
They're a good friend. That's not a problem, right? I'm not talking about asking them to crack a bottle of like Macallan 30. I'm talking about taste like Jack Daniels versus Jim Beam versus Maker's Mark versus Evan Williams and Elijah Craig or
That,
Michter's, like, the US one, like, and then see what you like.
yeah.
And then find a store and say to them, look, like I'm blown away by this type of bottle.
Hmm.
Most, usually in different whiskey countries, like there are certain whiskeys that you can group together in a certain flavor profile, right? Depending upon production methods or ingredients.
Hmm.
So, like, it's actually not that hard for somebody like, who's knowledgeable to say, oh, you like X. You're probably going to like these two as well. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, have you tried such and such? Or have you tried this, which is totally different
Hmm.
and it's going to blow your mind? Again, I think it's just trying to find people who are knowledgeable, willing to share their information, and places where you can try whiskey for not that much money and you can develop a real palate without breaking the bank.
Yeah. Big shout out to Orlando Whiskey Society. We've done bottle shares
Yeah.
and big events like that. People will very willingly want to share this with you, and
Yes.
that's one of the things I do enjoy. Typically about people who are enthusiasts is they want people to experience it with them and try it. One of my good friends, Dan Hacker, I wanted to try William LaRue Weller. I have
Yeah.
never tried it. It's one of those unicorn bottles, and we were sitting down. He's the owner and operator of the Ode Armagnac brand, and we were having a great conversation. And
Yeah.
we were just wrapping up, and we had the conversation about aged whiskeys or these unicorns and the value that's associated with them. And it's like, yeah, like one of the bottles that apparently I should try before I die is William LaRue Weller. He's like, I have some if you want to try it right now. And this is a bottle that people are highly sought after. And he's like, yeah, here, try it. And
Yeah.
it gave me the opportunity to understand whether I would want to spend what secondary or third market price is for this bottle.
Well, right. I mean, that's,
And that hype behind it versus the actual spirit was, it was fantastic. I'm not going to spend secondary or third, but it was something definitely worth trying. So I think that is something I learned in my journey, is that
Yeah.
cost doesn't necessarily equate to taste. One of my favorite ryes is the Sazerac rye. Simple,
Sure.
cheap, inexpensive. I won't say cheap, inexpensive brand. I enjoy it. Heaven Hill Bottle and Bond. It's like a 50,
Yes.
maybe $50 bottle, if that, depending on where you live, 35 to 50. And I
Yeah.
keep that on the shelf.
I mean, you don't have to spend a ton of money to get a good bottle of whiskey. I mean, there's still plenty of bottles that are undervalued. What you were talking about, Rittenhouse Rye is the perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
Prices keep going up, but Sazerac Rye is a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Wild Turkey, I mean,
Another
Michter's
one.
US One. I mean, there's a lot of really good whiskeys that cost less than 50, less
Mm-hmm.
than 40, less than $30 even. So
100%.
again, I mean, I think that people, you know, there are also no stupid questions when it comes to cocktails and spirits.
Yeah.
Most people drink out of fear. So if you're wondering about something, do not feel that is you're the only one who is wondering about this or is a
Mm-hmm.
dummy. Like it's everybody. Like in America, like after Prohibition, we lost so much institutional knowledge that like we're finally getting it back. So like you should ask questions. Like, and if you can't, if somebody's not willing to help you, then find somebody else. Like seriously. So and I think most whiskey drinkers are pretty passionate about it and willing to share the info. And there are resources like the Whiskey Bible or the Oxford Companion to Spirits and Cocktails or Dave Broom's excellent books or Lou Bryson's excellent books. So like, go out,
Make a friend.
read, sip,
Mm-hmm.
talk to people. I mean, it's great. I mean, it's a great excuse to drink and socialize and read a good book.
And you're 100% right. There's no the way a whiskey drinker's eyes light up when you share, like, hey, tell me about this. Like,
Right.
I've been wanting to. Like, they want to
Right.
share that knowledge. They want to share
Yeah.
their favorite spirit. Like, I have friends come over here and I will pop crack of bottles. Hey, you guys need to try this. I've been wanting someone else to try to tell me what they think or
Yeah.
like enjoy it with someone. And we'll make it a night of it. So yeah, I think there's a lot of value in finding kind of a community of people that will talk to, like, have that conversation. Just ask those questions. Um, we spoke a little bit about the how whiskey's kind of turned into this hot commodity where unicorn chasing all this. Um, have you? Does it? Do you worry about whiskey becoming kind of an asset thing where people just kind of keep those dusties and never open them, or do you think that there's what are your opinions about those like decorative
Well, I
bottles of whiskey,
mean,
as I like to refer to them, as someone with a dragon keeping their gold safe?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, like whiskey should be for drinking, right? And I think it's dangerous when like, when it becomes a investment vehicle, right?
Yeah,
And it creates its own behaviors, right? Where people don't want to open up bottles, and it becomes almost like some kind of artwork that lives in some tax-free zone in Switzerland, in a warehouse, never
yeah,
to be seen again, and it's just traded from one collector's portfolio to another. Um, I mean, I think that's the worst case scenario. But at the same time, if you told me 20 years ago, 10 years ago, that people would be this interested in whiskey for any reason, I'm not sure I would believe you. Um,
yeah.
so, I do think you know, that's the positive side of this is that, people are buying these things and some of them are drinking them, even some of them are collecting them. But again, it just shows interest in it. Sometimes it's the downside is that things that, used to cost $30 now cost $200 and makes it very hard to get, which is not great. Um, but the good news is there's plenty of other stuff that is still $30. So,
Yeah.
maybe I should talk about some of those less, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
I've
Big boy ones.
before learned my lesson, right? But again, I mean, look, it is what it is. I think there's definitely enough whiskey to go around, and at all price points. And it's that the collecting stuff is and the hunt. I mean, some people love that. Like that's they really
There's a
that's
thrill. There's a
there's a
thrill.
thrill. They're chasing that. I get that. I mean, I don't want to yuck their yum. Like I do think that I don't think that it's reasonable or not reasonable. I don't think that's a good idea to invest in whiskey, right? Like
Oh,
this idea that you're gonna like, by buying these bottles that in 10 years they're gonna be worth X and you're gonna be able to like exit and make this kind of profit.
yeah.
we that's sort of unprecedented, to be honest, because they're like the secondary market is fairly new for spirits,
Hmm.
unlike wine or cognac, at least in America. That I think is a little bit more dangerous. It would not suggest that people invest
Hmm.
in whiskey or booze. I mean, there is obviously potential to make money, or there has been the last few years, but that's I mean, that's like a form of gambling.
I was about to say,
I
not.
mean, I think that's that nobody knows if that's sensible or not right
Yeah.
now. And the whole market could implode like Beanie Babies or
Oh my
tulips
God, I
or,
remember that. Yeah.
right. So, I mean,
But
I,
I,
so again, I mean, I would not, I love that people collect whiskey. I don't think that you should be putting your life savings into whiskey with this idea that it's going to appreciate
yeah,
like a stock or a bond.
part of,
These things fluctuate and there's no FDIC insurance for Blanton's or Weller or Pappy, right?
yeah,
So it's not like buying a CD at a bank.
yeah. If it
This
dips in
isn't a
value, I get my money
guaranteed
back.
this is not a guaranteed return. So,
Yeah.
if you're willing to accept that risk, I mean, again,
No.
that's it's people's business, but
What? Well,
you
one
know,
of the reasons why I ask is, it's I've had, especially coming into the whiskey and side of things. There's always those. Hey, I'm saving this for a special occasion, and I believe it was the documentary Neat,
yeah.
where they were talking to, I forget his name, but he's from the Buffalo Trace Distillery. They made Freddie's. I think he
Oh
made.
yeah, who's the famous tour guide?
Yeah, him.
Yeah, he's yeah.
And they were talking about they gave him a bottle of Pappy's or something, and he was gonna put it up on a shelf for some special occasion. And his dad's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I'm saying for a special occasion." He's like, "Open that." It's like, "This is that occasion. Like, we don't know when we're gonna be able to do this again."
Yeah.
And making sure that it's not about waiting for a special occasion. Create this moment, create this memory, and drink it. So it's always funny, I guess, to me. To each their own, like you said. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
yuck anyone's yum, but I don't want a paperweight. I don't want something that's just going to occupy
Well,
space on the shelf. That's my personal preference. I want to enjoy it with someone while I can. Um,
I mean, I think that's the other part of it is that it's just I don't know.
what's your goal? Yeah, a bit of
And
a
how much
loaded.
space do you have? I don't know,
I
but
have a fiance who's really concerned about how much space we are running out of in this house. So, like every other shelf is like,
yeah,
when did you put rum over here?
yeah, fair, fair.
Real as one of the last questions, kind of about the book is you're writing a 600-page book requires massive tasting sessions. I'm assuming, and kind
Yeah.
of going through to like, I how what point does it become, I guess, almost taste blind, where everything starts to taste the same? How do you keep your palate fresh and objective when you're tasting 20 plus spirits?
Well,
Is
I mean, I mean, it's not like a book where like it's not reviews. I
Oh yeah,
don't
of
rank
course.
them. I don't rate them.
Mhm.
So I mean, it's more about like house style and like what makes one brand different than another one.
Okay.
So I mean, I was and I intentionally did that because these types of things, bottles come and go, right? Expressions come and go. Things get retired. Things get introduced.
But a style.
Things change over time. Distillery technology changes, so things change. So just to make the book evergreen, it would be very hard to like have like detailed tasting notes for every expression. So that's not in there. But
Okay.
but again, I mean, it did require like a lot of tasting, and certainly I've judged many different of the spirits competitions, and that is hard. I mean, I think most blenders, distillers bring the proof down, right?
Mhm.
They add water, right? A lot of it is using your nose. Water, there's a chemical reaction that releases aromas and
Yeah.
flavors once you add it.
Mhm.
Um, Also, plenty of water. If I am, I think there's a big difference between tasting and drinking, right? So if you're drinking, like this doesn't apply, but when you're tasting at like, the different big spirits competitions that I've been asked to judge in the past, I do spit right in between samples, right? You have to. There's always plenty of water. Things like crackers, bread,
Mhm.
helps to reset the palate. But again, I think there's just there's a finite number of things that you can taste in a row. I think it's very, very hard sometimes to judge, you know, at least for myself, dozens and dozens and dozens of spirits in one day, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's just I mean, some people I think are wired to do it, right? There's some wine professionals, they train to do it, they love to do it.
Mhm.
For me, I find that hard, to be honest. Like, and sometimes I think whiskey's particularly hard because it's so complex and rich and requires sometimes time to open up, and it evolves in the glass,
Yeah.
and so tasting some other spirit categories for myself is actually sometimes a lot easier, or like maybe it's like a little bit of a vacation from tasting whiskey at these.
Yeah.
So I don't mind. I like when I'm judging spirits competitions to be assigned to like things like RTDs or vodka, or
Okay.
because it's a different it's like a vacation.
Yeah, it's a different space. It's like breaking up the monotony of like, oh,
Exactly,
another whiskey.
exactly.
You switch it up.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, it's refreshing to know because I'm obviously not judging any contest, but when you go on like Kentucky Bourbon Trails and you go on these tours
Yeah,
back to back to back and you're trying 5, 7 whiskeys each
it's
distillery.
hard. I mean, that's hard too.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I like to spend 3 days at a distillery instead of three distillers in a day. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I just, or, but again, but like, obviously, like, you know, my, my interest level and time, I mean, that's what I do. So like, but I would argue that people, like, it's like one of those tours of Italy where, you see so much in
Yeah.
like a week that you don't even remember, you're looking at the photos where this piazza was versus, which city was that, because you saw so much. And I think the same thing with distilleries, where I would argue like, it's worth the time. It's worth it to spend more time at a distillery, to take the more in-depth tour, to really read up, to really soak up as much knowledge as you possibly can,
Mhm.
in the most amount of time that you have.
Yeah. I like that. All right. So as we get to know you, like, and we're closing out a little bit, I have a couple questions I love to ask every guest, right?
Sure.
Um, so one, we spoke about cocktails, so I wanted to ask you this: what is your deathbed cocktail, and what is your deathbed pour? It doesn't have to be whiskey,
Whew.
but last day on Earth, what's your cocktail? Because it's always interesting how different
uh
answers are depending on who the person is.
that's a hard one. I mean, I think that is a hard one. Deathbed cocktail, I mean, I feel like, you know I can tell you I love drinking highballs and old fashions, and
Pick one.
maybe Taylor's. I mean, maybe it's
It could be anything.
it's.
It could be with any makeup of whatever.
I think it's old fashioned because that's where it all starts. That's the original cocktail like
Mhm.
recipe. That's where it starts. The pour, they're just. I mean, I can say there'll be whiskey. Like beyond that, I'm not sure.
A rye, a bourbon. What do
I
we?
don't know. I mean, probably. I don't know. I mean, that's. I mean, hopefully that is far in the future.
Oh
So
yeah, far, far in the future.
we will
Well,
definitely say whiskey.
all right. Oh yeah, I like asking it. You'd be surprised the answers we get. Some bartenders will say, "I've been
Sure.
working in the industry so long that I just want a Bush Light,"
Yeah.
and I'm just, oh, all right. Or
To
good
each his
friend,
own.
yeah, manager of the original Orlando's first cocktail bar, Billy Maskers. He said a Hemingway daiquiri, and I
Sure.
up until he mentioned it, I never had
Papa
it.
Doble. Yeah.
Yeah, so I ended up, whenever someone mentions something I haven't tried, I always try to go and try
Yeah.
that out. So it's just fun. If there was in your travels, were there any whiskeys that you wish people knew more about or a specific area? We didn't get to touch on it, but there are other areas as well that really you highlight in your
Yeah.
book, like India and Taiwan, which I want to circle back to in a moment. But are there any whiskeys you wish people knew more about?
I mean, I think there's so many. I mean, at this point, I mean, I think that it's, there are 140 distilleries in Scotland, right? I mean, we get a very small selection in America, right? And
Mhm.
a lot of them go into blended scotch versus being bottled as single malts. So,
Are there any that stand out that you think they're doing some interesting things worth noting or undervalued?
oof, I mean,
Yeah, it's a tough question.
I mean, again, I mean, these questions, if we chatted 10 years ago, 15 years ago, totally easy to say. Like now,
Mm.
it's just so many whiskeys from around the world, right?
Mhm.
That are, I mean, places like France, England, as you were saying, India, Middle East, Lebanon, Israel. I mean, there's so many different distilleries. Again, I mean, I would say, argue that people should open up their minds and their palates, right, to try things from, and some of them you'll like, some of them you won't like, but it's, you can only make bourbon in America, not just Kentucky. Obviously, to make scotch, it has to come from Scotland. But other than that, like, there's so many people making incredible whiskey now across Canada, across the US, I mean, it's like, it, I mean, it's its
It's
own,
a tough
I mean, in
question.
some ways, the whole whiskey Bible, like, that's what it is, all those family trees. I mean, I try to include as many whiskey brands I possibly could.
Mhm.
Um, but obviously it's impossible to include all of them,
Yeah.
right? And you have incredible whiskeys coming out of big distilleries and also small distilleries. I, you know, I feel like I've answered your question, not answered it. So next,
Yeah, not specific, but just kind of trying out something new. You would
yeah,
just say, so try something you haven't tried before. Is give her,
sure,
yeah.
sure. I mean, I think we can get in a rut drinking whiskey too, like
Mhm.
anything else. And traditionally people would have one or two brands that they always drank, and now obviously people have, their tastes are much broader, and I think that's a wonderful thing where, it used to be you drank bourbon or rye, not both, and now
Mhm.
people drink both, and they drink American single malt, and they drink, so.
Yeah. All right. Kind of an off the cuff question. If it wasn't whiskey, what would be in your glass?
Ooh, I mean, I love champagne, right?
Really?
I love dark and stormies. I love
Okay.
Moscow mules. I love palomas and margaritas.
I find that interesting. You are the first to mention the champagne. I have had so many people on the show. Well,
Really, I mean,
Mark
it's.
Simmons did say that he would like champagne.
I mean, so many wonderful cocktails and spirits.
No, nothing wrong with it. I
I mean,
just
that's
find it interesting. Champagne's
yeah.
one of those that I don't know enough about at all, and that's
It's
the full
delicious.
transparent.
Yeah, I mean, it's delicious, and also like, if you add champagne to most cocktails, it technically becomes like a royal, like, so like you can make very dangerous daiquiri by topping it with sparkling wine. It doesn't have to be
Huh.
champagne. You could do that with margaritas. I mean, again, it's very delicious but potent.
Yeah.
Punch, you can add, classic punch, you could add sparkling wine to, which makes it really,
Yeah.
really delicious. So
Yeah. For those at home who know me, I'm always trying to explore cocktail recipes and ideas, especially when I come up with my own creative one.
yeah,
And when you use, those references or those inspirations from classic cocktails or established cocktails from newer generation bartenders, I guess I consider them like modern classics. Or
yeah,
there's been a lot of times when like you top with sparkling wine, champagne,
yeah.
prosecco, and they always note that it becomes more floral, more bright, more aromatic. Sorry, not
Yeah,
floral, aromatic, and enjoy. It's a different experience altogether. And, when you think about the chemical composition of the bubbles and all that stuff, it does make a lot of sense in those flavor
yeah,
profiles. It's fun because there's a big world out there for anyone who is learning about cocktails, about just a slight variation or using an item or an ingredient that you wouldn't think of. For example, when people use an absinthe rinse in almost it changes, even if it's just a rinse
yeah,
in the glass,
for sure.
changes the cocktail completely.
Absolutely.
So definitely
Absolutely.
interesting. All right, I know that we've had you for some time, but I and I don't want to close out because I do want to know more about the Taiwan whiskeys and all that you also mentioned in the books about what they're doing differently. But I guess that could be a teaser for people wanting to read the book.
Absolutely. It's all in the book. Yeah. I mean, the good news is that like, you know, so much of the things that we've talked about and so much more is in the book. And I think people feel the need to like try to like cram all this stuff in their minds. And it's like, the good news is like, you don't have to anymore because it's all in the whiskey Bible. So like, you're like, oh, what is like this whiskey made from? Like, well, it's all in there, right? So at the beginning of each chapter, there's, kind of a cheat sheet for the basics that you need to know. So again, I mean, it's like the type of thing where, instead of trying to figure this out on your own, it's all in one place now. I mean, that's what I loved about the wine Bible being like, oh, right, what grape varietals are in Merlot again, or, what's in, how do they do things in Italy versus France? Well, there it is. Boom. How do the super Tuscans are? Boom. So the same thing with the whiskey Bible. We're trying to make it easy for people. Drinking should be fun. And when you're like, Ray, like what, like, I know there's something about the cask or something. Well, it's in there, right? You can just go there and I think it's, I think with a dram in hand, it's always fun to should always be fun to read the whiskey Bible. So.
I would agree. And the nerd in me is always receptive to a deeper dive. And to your point, we started off this interview with the idea and thought process of knowing more about what's in your glass makes the experience that much better, at least in our opinion. It seems like we're aligned there. And being able to have that reference material in real time. This is not a knock on Google and all that, but half of those results,
absolutely.
Like, it's hard to sift through all that. You've done the hard work for us, so being able to just go, I'm gonna go flip real quick and look at what Scotch differences.
Yeah,
I love that. And where can people get the book? I know that.
Book is available, on most major retail, book sites or at independent bookstores. So it should be available across the country, around the world. If your bookstore doesn't have it, they certainly can order it. So
definitely. And thank you again for hooking me up with a copy. I will be reading it and referencing it. Honestly, there are times where on our show, I tell people about the basics. We want to talk about what simplifying it. And there's going to be things I am, for all intents and purposes, a novice in the industries. So I'm going to be using your book as reference for my stuff.
Please do. That's what it's intended for.
Yeah. As quote, hey, I was, you'll see it. I'll make sure. Any upcoming projects or events that you want to promote? Anywhere else people could support or follow you?
Yeah. I mean, on Instagram is usually the best place to find me. Send me your questions. If you read the book, love to hear feedback. Always leave a review on Amazon or other major booksellers online. Always love to see that. But thank you so much for having me on, Arthur. I appreciate it.
Of course. Do you have any upcoming events that you want to promote?
Nothing. I mean, like some, but I think, by the time, depending upon timing, they'll probably be over. But obviously, I was always down to Tales of the Cocktail in New Orleans in the summer in July. So if your listeners attend Tales, I should be there. So
let's see about getting a press
book signing.
Let's see about getting press pass. But that's in July in New Orleans, correct?
Exactly. Usually the third week of July. So
and what will you be doing there?
Probably, book signings. The programming hasn't been set yet, but usually hosting seminars, lunches, dinners, tastings. So, it's a full week of spirited fun. So
it's awesome, man. Well, I'm excited. As always, pleasure having you on the show. Thank you for coming on here and sharing that knowledge. The book is available on all major retailers. Go on Amazon. We'll drop the Amazon link. Not affiliated. Amazon, if you want to be affiliated with me, you let me know. But as always, guys, if you like what we're doing, make sure that you not only support Noah and his ventures, support the show, like, subscribe, share with your friends, share a dram, share a drink with some friends, get creative, have some fun with it. Spirits are meant to be fun. But obviously drink responsibly. Don't drink and drive, do the right thing, and just be good. Thanks, everyone. See you next week. Bye. Hey guys, today's episode is brought to you by Burn Termite and Pest Control. I first met Joe Byrne on Full Frontal Nerdity Show and decided to give his company a try. They have been the best pest service I've ever had, from flexible scheduling, attention to detail, fair pricing, and everything you love about a small business. I highly recommend Joe Byrne and Burn Termite and Pest Control. It's a family-owned and operated business with over 30 years of experience in termite and pest. You can reach Burn Termite and Pest Control at 321-297-7985. Once again, 321-297-7985. And let them know Bourbon and Bullshit sent you. Thanks, guys. See you next time.